60. It's the age everyone whispers about, but almost nobody actually calculates. You've probably run the number in your head 100 times. Some version of, maybe I could retire at 60, followed immediately by, but what if I run out of money at 85? That fear, sitting unresolved in the back of your mind, is exactly what we're fixing today. Because the honest answer to can I retire at 60 isn't yes or no. It's a specific number, and by the end of this video, you're going to know exactly how to find yours. Let's start with the single biggest misunderstanding about retiring at 60, because it changes everything else. 60 is not the same retirement math as 65 or 67. Every year earlier you retire is a year with no paycheck, a year still needing to be funded entirely from savings, and, critically, a year where you likely aren't yet eligible for certain benefits that people assume kick in automatically. This isn't meant to scare you off the idea. It's meant to make sure you're calculating the real version of it, not the version that quietly assumes benefits and safety nets that may not actually be available yet at 60. Let's talk about Social Security first, because this is where a lot of the confusion starts. You cannot claim Social Security at 60. The earliest age is 62, and even then, claiming that early locks in a permanently reduced benefit for the rest of your life. If you're planning to retire at 60, that means a minimum of 2 years, sometimes more depending on your strategy, where your entire monthly income needs to come from savings, investments, or other sources, with zero Social Security supplementing it. This single gap is the first thing that trips up a huge number of early retirement plans, simply because people mentally picture retirement income as starting the moment they stop working, when in reality, for a 60-year-old, there's a real gap to bridge first. Let's talk about Medicare next, because this is the second major gap that catches people off guard. Medicare eligibility doesn't begin until 65. If you retire at 60, that means 5 years where you need health insurance coverage entirely outside of Medicare, through a private individual plan, a spouse's employer coverage if that's available, or a marketplace plan. Health insurance in your early 60s, purchased individually, can be a genuinely significant monthly expense, and it needs to be calculated honestly as part of your real retirement number, not treated as an afterthought or assumed to somehow sort itself out. So right away, retiring at 60 means bridging two very real gaps: income before Social Security and health coverage before Medicare, for at least 5 years, sometimes longer, depending on your specific timeline and choices. This isn't a reason to abandon the idea. It's the foundation of calculating whether it's actually realistic for your specific situation. Now let's talk about the number that actually matters. How much do you need saved to retire at 60 specifically, rather than at a more traditional retirement age? Here's the honest, uncomfortable truth. Retiring 5 to 7 years earlier than a traditional retirement age doesn't just mean 5 to 7 fewer years of contributions to your savings. It also means 5 to 7 additional years that your savings need to stretch to cover, on the other end, without the benefit of those working years' worth of continued growth and contributions. This double effect, less time to save, more years the savings need to last, is exactly why retiring at 60 typically requires a meaningfully larger nest egg than retiring at 65 or 67, even though it might feel like only a few years earlier. Let's walk through the actual math using a commonly referenced starting point, the 4% rule, which suggests that withdrawing around 4% of your total retirement savings in the first year, then adjusting for inflation in later years, has historically had a reasonably strong track record of lasting through a typical multi-decade retirement. It's a rough guideline, not a guarantee, but it's a useful starting point for this conversation. If your real annual expenses, after accounting for the health insurance gap before Medicare and zero Social Security income before 62, come out to say $50,000 a year, using that 4% guideline suggests needing somewhere in the neighbourhood of $1.25 million invested, specifically to support that level of withdrawal safely over a longer than typical retirement horizon. That number changes significantly based on your actual expenses, so this is illustrative, not a one-size-fits-all target, but it shows how quickly the math scales up once you account for a longer retirement window and the specific bridge years before benefits begin. Let's talk about what actually makes retiring at 60 more realistic, because there are real, practical levers that change this calculation significantly. The first lever is a paid-off home. Housing is usually the largest expense in any retirement budget, and eliminating a mortgage payment before retiring at 60 can dramatically reduce your required annual expenses, which directly reduces the total nest egg needed to support those expenses safely. The second lever is a spouse who's either still working for a few more years or who has their own retirement income or benefits that help cover the household during this bridge period. A household with two potential income sources has far more flexibility than a single person trying to cover this entire gap alone. The third lever is a part-time income or a passion project that generates even modest money during these bridge years. This doesn't have to replace your former full-time income. Even $15,000 or $20,000 a year from part-time or consulting work can meaningfully reduce how much needs to come from savings during the years before Social Security and Medicare kick in, buying your investments valuable time to continue growing untouched. The fourth lever is healthcare cost planning specifically. Before retiring at 60, it's worth researching actual marketplace insurance costs for your specific age, location, and health situation, rather than guessing. In some cases, structuring your income carefully in these early retirement years can actually help you qualify for subsidies that reduce marketplace insurance costs significantly. This is a genuinely valuable, often overlooked strategy that a financial advisor familiar with early retirement can help you navigate. The fifth lever is a bridge strategy specifically for the years before Social Security, sometimes called a Social Security bridge. Rather than viewing your entire nest egg as needing to last 30 plus years at a flat 4% withdrawal rate, some early retirees structure a specific pool of savings designed purely to cover living expenses from 60 until Social Security begins at 62, or later if delaying further. This lets the rest of your portfolio remain invested for long-term growth, rather than needing to support withdrawals starting on day one of retirement. Let's talk about sequence of returns risk specifically as it relates to early retirement, because this risk is amplified the earlier you retire. A market downturn in the first few years of any retirement is dangerous, but it's especially dangerous when retiring at 60, simply because your money needs to last longer overall, giving a bad early downturn more time to compound its damage across a longer retirement horizon. This is exactly why the 1-year cash rule and a broader bucket strategy separating short-term, medium-term, and long-term money becomes even more critical for someone retiring specifically at 60 rather than a more traditional retirement age. Let's talk honestly about a version of this that a lot of people don't consider: partial or phased retirement, rather than a hard stop at 60. Some people who technically could grind out a few more years of full-time work choose instead to shift to part-time work, consulting, or a less demanding role starting at 60, rather than fully retiring immediately. This approach can bridge the income and healthcare gaps significantly, sometimes through continued access to employer health coverage, while still dramatically reducing the stress and demands of a full-time career. It's not the same as fully retiring at 60, but for a lot of people, it offers a meaningful middle ground, significantly more freedom and flexibility, without requiring the full nest egg that a hard, complete retirement at 60 would demand. Let's talk about a concrete example to make this feel real rather than abstract. Picture someone turning 60 with a paid-off home, a spouse still working part-time for a few more years, and roughly $700,000 invested. Their real annual expenses, including a marketplace health insurance estimate for the bridge years, come out to around $38,000. Using the 4% guideline, that portfolio could reasonably support that level of spending, especially with the spouse's continued part-time income helping cover some of the gap and Social Security arriving in just 2 years to further ease the reliance on savings. Now picture someone else turning 60, single, still carrying a mortgage, without additional income sources, hoping to retire on $400,000 total, with real annual expenses around $55,000 once realistic health insurance costs are included. That same 4% guideline suggests a serious, meaningful gap between what they have and what the math suggests is needed to support that spending level safely over a longer retirement horizon. Same age, same general goal. Two completely different realities shaped by housing, spousal income, health costs, and total savings. This is exactly why "Can I retire at 60" was never going to have one universal answer. It depends entirely on your specific numbers, your specific gaps, and which of the levers we just walked through are realistically available to you. So here's your homework, and I want you to actually sit down and do this, not just nod along. First, calculate your real annual expenses at 60, specifically including a realistic health insurance estimate for the years before Medicare, since this is the piece people most often underestimate or skip entirely. Second, identify exactly how many years you'll need to bridge before Social Security begins, based on when you actually plan to claim it, and calculate what those bridge years will cost, separate from your long-term retirement number. Third, add up your actual current total retirement savings and investments, and compare that honestly against a reasonable withdrawal guideline like the 4% rule, adjusted for your specific expenses and timeline. Fourth, look honestly at which levers are realistically available to you: a paid-off home, a spouse's income, part-time work, marketplace insurance subsidies, a specific bridge strategy, and consider how each one might close whatever gap your calculation reveals. That exercise, done honestly with your real numbers, replaces the vague hope of, maybe I could retire at 60, with an actual concrete answer. Yes, with a clear plan, no, not yet. But here's specifically what needs to change, or somewhere in between, with a phased or partial approach that gets you most of the freedom without the full financial risk. Retiring at 60 is absolutely possible for plenty of people. It's also genuinely not realistic yet for plenty of others, at least not without some adjustments first. The difference between those two groups almost never comes down to luck. It comes down to whether someone actually ran their real numbers, honestly, years before deciding, rather than guessing and hoping it would somehow work out on its own. Thank you so much for watching. If this gave you a clearer, more honest picture of what retiring at 60 would actually take for your specific situation, follow along, because I break down real, practical retirement strategies like this every single week. And tell me honestly in the comments, is 60 your real target? And have you actually run the numbers yet? Or is this the nudge you needed to finally sit down and calculate it for real? I read every single comment and I'd love to know where you're starting from.